Before we begin, a crucial note. The story you are about to hear is a complex tapestry woven from decades of historical records, declassified documents, court testimonies, and investigative journalism. It is presented not to glorify, but to inform, to lay bare the shadowy intersections of crime, politics, and power. Our sole purpose is to deliver the most accurate and comprehensive narrative possible directly to you. Now, prepare for a journey into a world where shadows govern and where one man operated from their deepest recess. What you are about to learn is the untold truth of Japan's most formidable power broker. If you are ready to uncover the real story behind the myths, listen closely and remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this is a tale you will not find in any ordinary history book. The story of Yoshio Kodama is not merely a biography of a criminal. It is the chronicle of an architect of the post-war Japanese state, a man whose influence seeped into the very foundations of its politics and economy, shaping the nation's destiny from a labyrinth of backroom deals and whispered threats. Born on February 18, 1911, in the city of Fukushima, Kodama's early life was marked by hardship and a fierce, rebellious intelligence. Orphaned young, he was raised by a relative, but the constraints of a conventional path chafed against his ambitious spirit. While still a teenager, he found his calling not in the classrooms or factories, but in the fervent ultra-nationalist societies that flourished in the tumultuous Japan of the 1920s and 1930s. These groups, fueled by expansionist ideology and a disdain for liberal democracy, became Kodama's university. He proved to be a brilliant, ruthless operative, demonstrating a preternatural talent for organization, fundraising, and intimidation. His rise was meteoric within these clandestine circles, where he earned a reputation not as a mere thug, but as a strategic thinker who understood that true power required capital. He ventured into the murky world of speculation and procurement, leveraging his nationalist connections to secure lucrative contracts, particularly for strategic war materials. By his mid-20s, Kodama had amassed a significant personal fortune and a formidable network that spanned the military, the zaibatsu, and the criminal underworld. His operations extended to occupied China, where he orchestrated the plunder of vast resources, metals, gems, opium, with brutal efficiency, using a private fleet of ships and a small army of enforcers. This period forged the essential Kodama, a man who saw no distinction between patriotism, profit, and piracy, believing his actions served a grander imperial destiny. The chaos of war was not a disruption, but a marketplace, and he traded in its most valuable commodities influence and fear. As World War II raged, Kodama's power grew, embedded within the militaristic regime, yet operating with a startling degree of autonomy. His wealth insulated in Swiss bank accounts and hidden caches. He became a ghost in the machine of the Japanese war effort, a fixer who could procure the impossible for a price, and who answered not to a single general or admiral, but to the dark logic of his own accumulating power. The impending defeat of Japan in 1945 would have been the end for a lesser man, but for Yoshio Kodama, it was merely the end of the first act. The surrender and the subsequent American occupation presented not a reckoning, but a spectacular opportunity for reinvention, setting the stage for his most astonishing chapter, where he would transition from a wartime profiteer to the indispensable, hidden hand of a new Japan. When the dust settled over a defeated, occupied Japan in 1945, Yoshio Kodama, like many of his nationalist and militarist associates, should have faced the wrath of the victorious Allies. Labeled a Class A war crimes, suspect by the American occupation authorities under General Douglas MacArthur, he was imprisoned in Sugamo Prison, a place destined to house the empire's most notorious figures. Yet, within the cold, confining walls of his cell, Kodama began to weave the first threads of his resurrection and his most consequential alliance. The rapidly shifting global landscape, with the nascent Cold War casting a long shadow, transformed enemies into assets. American strategists, initially intent on purging Japan of its militaristic elements, now perceived a new, more pressing threat: the spread of communism in Asia. They needed reliable, fiercely anti-communist partners on the ground, men who understood the underbelly of Japanese society, who could mobilize forces, break strikes, and gather intelligence. Kodama, the pragmatic survivor, positioned himself perfectly. From his prison cell, he offered the Americans a deal: his vast network, his unparalleled knowledge of Asian smuggling routes and hidden caches of wealth, and his unwavering anti-communist fervor in exchange for his freedom and a role in the new order. The Americans, through covert intelligence channels, accepted. In a stunning reversal, Kodama was released in 1948, never tried for his wartime activities. His dossier was not discarded, but filed away for future use. This marked the birth of Kodama as the ultimate Kuromaku, the Black Curtain, puppeteer operating behind the scenes of Japan's democratic theater. His first and most critical task was to assist the Americans and the emerging conservative political establishment in undermining the powerful left. Wing unions and socialist movements that threatened both American interests and the Liberal Democrat Party, which would dominate Japanese politics for decades. Kodama became a master of black operations, funding and directing right-wing gangs and Yakuza syndicates to break strikes, disrupt communist rallies, and intimidate political opponents. He served as a critical conduit between the CIA, the LDP, and the underworld, a tripartite alliance that would define Japan's political reality. Furthermore, he played a key, shadowy role in the formation of the Liberal Party, the precursor to the LDP, funneling money, much of it from his own hidden wartime fortune, and later from covert American funds, to politicians who would shape Japan's pro-American, anti-communist stance. His home in the upscale Denenchofu district of Tokyo became a salon of power, where cabinet ministers, corporate titans, intelligence officers, and Yakuza bosses mingled, their interests aligned by Kodama's deft mediation. He was the glue binding the legitimate to the illicit, the public face of democracy to its private, enforcer-backed machinery. This period saw Kodama reach the zenith of his influence, a man who could make or break political careers, sway policy decisions, and control vast swaths of the economy through a web of holding companies and informal agreements. He was, in every sense, a less statesman, a minister of the shadows, and his power seemed unassailable, built on secrets that too many in high places shared. The foundation of Kodama's post-war empire, however, required a constant, massive influx of capital to sustain his political patronage, his lavish lifestyle, and the armies of enforcers at his disposal. While his wartime loot provided a seed, the true engine of his wealth in the 1950s and 1960s was his mastery over Japan's Seisho, the political merchants, or fixers who brokered relationships between government, industry, and finance. Kodama elevated this practice to an art form, specializing in the most sensitive and lucrative sectors: defense, aviation, and shipbuilding. His network, which included high-ranking officials in the Ministry of International Trade and Industry and the Defense Agency, allowed him to act as an unofficial and highly paid consultant for major corporations seeking government contracts. He would guarantee favorable outcomes, navigate bureaucratic hurdles, and eliminate competition, all for a staggering commission, often a percentage of the contract value itself. This system operated on a simple, corrupt logic. Corporations paid Kodama for access and results. Politicians received kickbacks and secret campaign funds through him, and Kodama took his cut, becoming astonishingly wealthy while tightening his grip on the levers of power. His influence extended into the media, where he held sway over certain publications and journalists, and into the entertainment industry, further blurring the lines between the mainstream and the underworld. Yet, the very nature of this power, based on secrecy, mutual blackmail, and the careful balancing of volatile interests, made it inherently fragile. Kodama's role demanded that he be the keeper of too many secrets, the holder of too many IOUs. As Japan's economy boomed during its miracle years, the sums involved in his dealings grew exponentially, attracting greater scrutiny from a new generation of journalists and a public increasingly skeptical of the cozy ties between politicians and business. Furthermore, within the Yakuza world, Kodama's status as the supreme fixer bred resentment and rivalry. While he maintained close ties with the Yamaguchi, Gomi, Japan's largest crime syndicate, and other groups, his position was that of a patron, not a member. This distance gave him a degree of legitimacy in elite circles, but could also make him a target for underworld figures who coveted his political connections. The strain of maintaining this vast, clandestine network began to show. Kodama, ever the strategist, understood that his influence depended on his perceived indispensability and his ability to deliver. To maintain this, he ventured into ever riskier international deals, setting the stage for the transaction that would not only shatter his empire but also trigger one of the greatest political scandals in Japanese history. A scandal that would lay bait in the core of the nation's establishment, and finally they dragged the Kuromaku into the blinding light, into the downfall. The Yakuza blade were brought in from Mama. But an American aerospace giant, the Lockheed Corporation, by the early 1970s, Lockheed was in dire financial straits, and its survival hinged on securing massive international sales for its new wide-body airliner, the L-1011 Tristar. The Japanese market, with its state-owned flagship carrier All Nippon Airways planning a major fleet expansion, was a prize worth billions. Lockheed knew, however, that penetrating Japan's insular aviation market, heavily influenced by domestic industry and political factions, required more than a superior product. It required a key to unlock the back rooms of the Ministry of Transport and the Prime Minister's office. That key was Yoshio Kodama, Lockheed's senior vice president for international sales. Karl Kochian authorized a covered agreement, channeling millions of dollars in consultancy fees through Kodama's complex web of offshore accounts and front companies. Kodama, true to his reputation, delivered. He leveraged his unparalleled connections, reportedly reaching the highest levels of the Tanaka Kikuei government, to ensure that ANA selected the Lockheed L-1011 over its main competitor, the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. The deal was sealed, and Lockheed transferred over $7 million to Kodama and his associates, with the understanding that a significant portion would be used as bribes for Japanese government officials. For a time, the arrangement functioned as countless others had invisibly, efficiently. Kodama had once again proven his worth, securing a victory for an American corporate client while enriching himself and his political allies. But the veil of secrecy began to tear in 1976, not in Tokyo, but in Washington, D.C. A series of explosive U.S. Senate subcommittee hearings, led by Senator Frank Church, investigated allegations of widespread bribery by American corporations overseas. Lockheed's dealings and the name Yoshio Kodama were thrust into the international spotlight. The testimonies and documents revealed a shocking pattern of payoffs, with Kodama at the very center of the Japanese arm of the scheme. The revelation sent seismic shocks through Japan, a nation still proud of its post-war economic miracle and fragile democratic institutions. The scandal ignited a firestorm of public outrage, investigative journalism, and political panic. For the first time, the Japanese public received a detailed, official glimpse into the shadowy mechanics of their government. A world where backroom fixers like Kodama dictated national policy for private gain. The Lockheed scandal was no longer a foreign corruption case. It became a profound domestic crisis, threatening to topple the ruling LDP and expose a generation of politicians as beholden to criminal interests. And at the eye of this hurricane stood the aged, ailing, but still formidable Yoshio Kodama, the man who knew where all the bodies were buried and who now faced the greatest challenge of his life, surviving the reckoning he had helped to create. As the Lockheed scandal erupted, Yoshio Kodama transformed from a shadowy legend into Japan's most famous and most hunted man. The public prosecutor's office, under immense public pressure, launched an unprecedented investigation. For them, Kodama was not just a target, he was the ultimate prize, the linchpin whose testimony could unravel the entire conspiracy and implicate the highest echelons of power, including former Prime Minister Tanaka Kikuei, who was eventually arrested and charged. However, Extracting testimony from Kodama proved to be a Herculean task. He retreated behind the walls of his Denenchofu mansion, which became a fortress under constant media siege. He employed a battery of Japan's most skilled and aggressive lawyers who used every legal maneuver to delay and obfuscate. More importantly, Kodama wielded the weapon he had spent a lifetime sharpening: silence. He understood the rules of the world he inhabited better than anyone. To talk was to betray the fundamental code of the Kuromaku and the underworld, a betrayal that would not only end his influence, but could very well end his life and the lives of his family. His refusal to cooperate was absolute and defiant. When summoned for questioning, he often cited ill health, which was not entirely feigned. The stress of the scandal had taken a severe toll on him. The prosecutors, armed with documentary evidence from the U.S. Senate hearings, had a strong circumstantial case against him for tax evasion and for violating foreign exchange control laws. Yet, the core charge of bribery was harder to pin directly on him without his confession or the testimony of those he bribed, who were, of course, powerful politicians equally incentivized to stay silent. The standoff became a national spectacle, a test of wills between the forces of a shaken democracy trying to assert the rule of law and a single, stubborn old man who embodied the law of the shadows. During this period, Kodama's health deteriorated significantly. He suffered a series of strokes that left him partially paralyzed and struggling with speech. His physical decline added another layer of complexity to the legal drama, with his lawyers arguing he was unfit to stand trial. Yet, even from his sickbed, he remained a potent symbol. To the public, he was the grotesque face of systemic corruption. To his allies and dependents in the political and underworld spheres, he was a dam holding back a flood of indictments. The pressure on him was unimaginable, coming from all sides. Prosecutors demanding he talk, former allies fearing he would talk, and a media landscape dissecting his every move. This prolonged, agonizing stalemate was the beginning of his end, not with a dramatic courtroom conviction, but with a slow, inexorable erosion of his power and health, as the empire he built on secrets began to crumble from within, its foundations exposed to the harsh light of day for the first time. The final years of Yoshio Kodama were a tragic and gothic epilogue to a life of audacious power. Confined mostly to his mansion, a physical and metaphorical prisoner of his own making, he became a ghost of his former self. The strokes had ravaged his body, but his mind, though trapped, remained fiercely aware of the ruins of his legacy. The Lockheed scandal had achieved what war, imprisonment, and rivals could not. It had broken the spell of invincibility. The political establishment, in a frantic effort to save itself, began to distance itself from him. The steady stream of powerful visitors to Denenchofu dwindled to a trickle. The money flows that sustained his operations constricted under legal scrutiny. Within the Yakuza world, his influence waned as well. The new generation of syndicate leaders, while respecting his past stature, saw him as a liability, a colossal attention drawing target that brought unwanted heat from law enforcement. The delicate ecosystem of fear and favor he had cultivated was collapsing. In 1977, adding a final, surreal layer to his infamy, Kodama became the victim of a bizarre and audacious crime himself. He was targeted by the Mysterious Friends Society, a radical left-wing group, in a kidnapping and extortion plot that went awry, further highlighting his vulnerability. Though he was not physically harmed in the incident, it underscored how the mighty Kuromaku had been reduced to a target for fringe groups. Isolated, ill, and besieged, Kodama spent his days surrounded by a small coterie of loyalists. His vast library of classical Chinese texts perhaps offering scant solace. He watched as the trials of others proceeded, as former Prime Minister Tanaka was convicted, and as the LDP scrambled to implement superficial reforms while maintaining its grip on power. The system he helped build survived, albeit with a deep and lasting stain, but Kodama himself was expendable. He was the sacrificial figure, the symbol upon which public anger could be spent, allowing the deeper structures of corruption to adapt and persist. His death on January 17, 1984, from complications of his strokes, was anticlimactic in a legal sense. It came before he could ever be convicted, leaving many questions permanently unanswered and allowing countless secrets to die with him. Yet, in a historical sense, it was profoundly fitting. He died not in a prison cell or on an operating table, but in the shadowy twilight of his own home, a realm he had controlled completely, his passing marking the definitive end of an era where a single, unelected man could wield such immense, clandestine power over the fate of a nation. To understand the true legacy of Yoshio Kodama, one must look beyond the man and examine the indelible shadow he cast on Japan's political and social landscape. His life serves as the definitive blueprint for the phenomenon of Kuromaku politics, demonstrating how a figure operating entirely outside the formal democratic framework could become its most influential architect. The system of triangular corruption he perfected, where big business provided money, politicians provided policy favors and protection, and right-wing fixers and gangsters provided enforcement and dirty work, did not die with him. It merely evolved, becoming more sophisticated and discreet in the post-Lockheed era. The scandal led to tighter regulations on political donations and foreign exchange, but it did not eradicate the fundamental culture of kinkin-seiji. Subsequent decades would see major scandals like the Recruit and Sagawa Cuban affairs, each echoing the Lockheed template of money for influence, proving that the channels Kodama helped dig remained deeply ingrained. Furthermore, his early Cold War role as a bridge between American intelligence, the LDP, and anti-communist forces cemented a pattern of covert cooperation that has had lasting implications for Japan's domestic security and foreign policy. His story also forced a reluctant Japanese public to confront the uncomfortable, intertwined history of its conservative ruling party and organized crime, a relationship that continues to surface in scandals involving local politics and construction industries. On a personal level, Kodama remains a complex, almost mythical figure in the popular imagination. He is vilified as the kingpin of the Shadow Shogunate, that corrupted Japan's democracy. Yet he is also, in some quarters, grudgingly admired as a man of immense will, intelligence, and patriotic fervor, a product of his tumultuous times, who played the hand he was dealt with ruthless brilliance. His biography reads like a novel, spanning imperial expansion, World War, Cold War espionage, economic miracle, and spectacular scandal, making him a perennial subject for books, films, and documentaries. Yet, the most crucial aspect of his legacy is cautionary. Yoshio Kodama's life is a masterclass in how democracies can be hollowed out from within, not by coups or revolutions, but by the silent, patient work of those who broker power in the dark, who convince the powerful that they need the lawless, and who erode public trust until the state itself becomes a vehicle for private interests. He proved that the most dangerous criminal is not the one who defies the system, but the one who becomes indispensable to it. The international dimensions of Kodama's operations reveal a man who was not merely a Japanese fixer, but a global actor in the clandestine theater of the Cold War. His networks, established during his wartime plunder in China and Southeast Asia, provided him with unique assets that were highly valuable to multiple intelligence agencies, beyond his well-documented ties to American CIA operatives. Evidence suggests he maintained contacts with intelligence services in Taiwan and South Korea, serving as an informal channel for anti-communist coordination in Northeast Asia. His fleet of ships and knowledge of maritime smuggling routes made him a potential asset for moving more than just bribes. They could move people, weapons, and information. This placed Kodama in a rarefied space, a non-state actor with the reach and resources to influence regional dynamics. His role in the Lockheed affair itself was international, connecting American corporate greed with Japanese political corruption. But his ambitions may have stretched further. Some researchers and journalists have speculated about his involvement in even darker enterprises, such as the trafficking of narcotics from the Golden Triangle in the post-war period, using his established routes to fund his political operations. While concrete evidence is elusive, given the opacity of his dealings, it is consistent with his modus operandi of seeking the highest profit, least visible commodities. Furthermore, his relationships with figures like the anti-communist guerrilla leader Yoshio Suji and his support for various right-wing causes across Asia paint a picture of a man engaged in a transnational ideological struggle. He saw himself, in his own twisted way, as a guardian of a traditional, authoritarian Asian order against the twin threats of communism and Western-style liberal democracy, which he viewed as weak and corruptible. This ideological bent, combined with his utter lack of scruples, made him the perfect mercenary for intelligence agencies and corporations that needed deniable, effective action in the gray zones of the Cold War. His home was a clearinghouse for information flowing between Tokyo, Washington, Seoul, and Taipei. In this light, Kodama was a precursor to the kind of influence peddlers and private intelligence contractors that would proliferate in later decades. He demonstrated how a private individual, armed with money, connections, and ruthless ambition, could carve out a sphere of influence that intersected with, and sometimes directed, the foreign policies of nations. His story forces us to expand our understanding of power in the 20th century, acknowledging that alongside the visible histories of states and treaties, there existed a subterranean history written by men like Kodama, where the fate of nations could be swayed not in parliaments or on battlefields, but in private lounges, on unregistered ships, and through transfers in numbered Swiss bank accounts. Within the annals of organized crime, Yoshio Kodama occupies a unique and elevated throne. He was not a Yakuza boss in the traditional sense. He did not lead a syndicate with its own hierarchy, territory, and initiation rights. Instead, he existed above them as a Oyabun to the Oyabuns. His power derived from his ability to provide what the Yakuza syndicates desperately needed, but could rarely obtain on their own: legitimacy, political protection, and access to the highest levels of the legitimate economy. He was the ultimate broker, translating the violent, coercive power of the gangs into political capital and financial gain. In return, the Yakuza served as his private army, enforcing his will, breaking strikes, and intimidating opponents at the ballot box. This symbiotic relationship was formalized in events like the 1963 gathering at the Suroka Hot Spring, where Kodama famously mediated a peace treaty between warring Yakuza factions, not as a peer, but as a respected elder statesman whose authority all acknowledged. His role was crucial in the Yakuza's transition from street-level gangs to sophisticated economic entities in the post-war period. By funneling construction contracts, entertainment district controls, and financial market opportunities to his underworld allies, he helped professionalize and enrich organized crime, embedding it deeply within Japan's economic miracle. He provided a model for how criminal organizations could achieve a degree of social integration and political impunity. This legacy is profoundly troubling. The perception of the Yakuza in Japan, even today, carries a strange duality, simultaneously feared and romanticized, seen as both a social evil and a vestige of a chivalrous code. Kodama's patronage contributed to this by lending an air of pseudo-legitimacy and nationalistic purpose to their activities, framing them as anti-communist patriots. His downfall in the Lockheed scandal did severe, but temporary, damage to this arrangement, forcing a period of lower visibility for the Yakuza. However, the structures of cooperation he helped build in industries like construction, finance, and waste disposal proved resilient. His life stands as a testament to the fact that the most potent form of organized crime is not that which opposes the state, but that which co-opts and is co-opted by it. In Yoshio Kodama, the Yakuza found their most powerful and connected advocate, a man who could walk into the prime minister's office and into a syndicate headquarters with equal ease, and in doing so, he permanently altered the trajectory of Japanese organized crime, elevating it from the back alleys to the boardrooms and the back benches of the Diet itself. The tale of Yoshio Kodama concludes not with a moral, but with a haunting echo. He vanished from the world as he had often operated within it, leaving behind a puzzle of contradictions. a trail of unanswered questions, and a system forever altered by his touch. We are left to ponder the true cost of his influence, measured not in yen or dollars, but in the erosion of public trust, the perversion of democratic ideals, and the lives sidelined or shattered by the machinery of corruption he oiled and operated. His story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our own societies. Where do the shadows in our halls of power truly lead? Who are the modern day fixers operating in the spaces between legality and influence, between intelligence agencies and criminal enterprises, between corporate boardrooms and government chambers? The methods may have evolved: cyber, currency, offshore shell companies, sophisticated lobbying, but the human impulses of greed, ambition, and the desire for unaccountable power remain constant. Yoshio Kodama was a monster, perhaps, but one that his era meticulously created and nurtured. He was the dark spirit of Japan's rapid, tumultuous transformation from militarist empire to economic superpower, a living embodiment of the compromises and sins buried beneath the miracle. As you reflect on this epic, decades-long narrative of rise and fall, remember that history is not merely about the past. It is a lens through which to examine the present. The legacy of the Kuromaku lingers in every undisclosed donation, in every backroom deal shielded from public view, in every alliance of convenience between power and crime. If this journey into the heart of a hidden empire has gripped you, if it has made you think differently about the nature of power, then our purpose has been served. We strive to bring you the deepest, most meticulously researched stories that go beyond the headlines to uncover the complex truths. Help us continue this mission. Your support fuels our research and allows us to shed light on other forgotten or concealed chapters of history. Please show your engagement, like this video to amplify its reach. Share it with others who crave real understanding, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on. We have many more shocking, true narratives waiting to be told, and we don't want you to miss a single one. The story of Yoshio Kodama is over, but the search for truth never ends.